So I'm so torn about this because I lived a lot of chastity as a teen. You know, Margie, I saved myself to marriage. Margie and I are faithful to each other. We all know about STIs and unwanted teenage pregnancy and assault and like all the reasons why there's probably a lot of good to the church encouraging youth to wait, or encouraging youth to do their best to wait. And so I'm torn because there's something that's so beautiful, and I lived it, of being that Mormon kid that's being righteous and reading the scriptures and serving and going to seminary and saying your prayers and doing good and just dedicating your life to purity or goodness or truth. And so I'm so torn because I don't love the collateral damage of all the youth that suffer and even get depression or anxiety or suicidality over not being able to live up. And yet, when I hear you talk about turning around and becoming a righteous youth, I'm inspired by that. I'm like, that's one of the best parts about Mormonism is they can pump out kids like you became and like I feel like I was for so many years. Do you feel mixed or ambivalent about that or not?
I do. I feel very conflicted because, my experiences having sex as a teenager were not positive.
They weren't?
No, they weren't. And, I had
Why,
sex.
why not? Why weren't they positive?
The first boy that we both lost our virginity, it was like 1 or 2 times and it was fine. There wasn't. But I started dating a boy who's 3 years older than me after that, who I also was intimate with. And he was very much selfish in the sexual activities, very much made me feel very uncomfortable, wanted me to do things I was not ready to do or felt comfortable doing. And I very much wish that I had not been intimate with him. Comparing that now to what it's like to be with someone who you're committed to and who you're going to, really fight to make things work. And if you don't perform well, it's not going to change how you feel about each other. There's a whole different feeling that goes into that level of intimacy that, has been so much better for me. So I feel, like I want my kids as best as they can to wait. The thing I would change is the connection to your standing before God. Let's talk about all the benefits of waiting till marriage. Let's talk about some of the harms that happen with premarital sex, but let's not tie it to your worthiness before God. Let's not have it be something you have to confess and be punished, lose privileges for that are pretty public. People see me not taking the sacrament. People see all the kids going on the temple trips and I'm not there. It's very much, there's very few things that keep you from doing those things, especially as a youth. And people usually pretty know it's either porn, masturbation, or some immoral sin. So let's cut that out of it and let's just talk about why it's helpful to wait. That's my feeling now.
As I imagine church leaders sitting around trying to decide how to deal with these things, I imagine them saying, but Kalin, it was the punishments that got you to change.
Yeah.
If the church had just said, hey, try not to do that, you're still great before God, would you have ever had the motivation to change?
See, I feel like that's one of the lies that religion tells us, that we're only good because we have to be for God. And again, that's something I want to talk about more with my faith transition. But I've learned that the goodness was in me all along. I am at my core good. And I think had I been taught more how to access that internal authority and internal goodness, I think that would have been maybe just as effective, if not more. But we don't really teach kids how to do that. We don't teach them how to reach inward and access that. It's all external.
So, and that's why I love the work of Shefali Sabari, Conscious Parenting, The Awakened Family. What she talks about is its connection that's most important, that if you can be connected with your children and then have your kids be connected with themselves, they can develop their own intrinsic sense of morality and standards and values. And it's driven from their core instead of from an external source. But you don't get that by rules and punishments and consequences. You get that from cultivating with them, again, an intrinsic sense of their own values and standards. And I think we make the assumption that kids can't do that. They're too young. Their brains aren't formed. They're too wild, too many emotions. So we've got to give them, crimes and punishments. And I think what you're saying is there might be a better way.
Yeah. I think there is. And I don't know exactly what that is. I'm probably going to screw things up with my kids, but, I don't think that was helpful. I don't think long term, I think that affected me in a lot more ways than I realized were happening at the time.
Yeah. Okay. So I think now let's transition. You were, unless there's anything else about your pre-mission life you want to share, anything else that's kind of rough? So let's talk about quickly your faith and how you even might have heard about Mormon Stories prior to your mission and, kind of your faith questions. And then let's talk about the age change and the mission frenzy and your decision to go on a mission.
Yeah. So I graduated high school. I got into both BYU and BYU Idaho. I originally was planning to go to BYU, but I felt like I wanted to be at the more righteous school. And so I chose to go to BYU Idaho. I liked the spirit there. I felt like people were more righteous. And again, for me, it was what's the best thing to do? What's the most right thing to do? And so I decided to go to BYU Idaho. The day that I was leaving for college, I was going to go up and stay with my sister and then drive up to BYU-I. My older brother texts me and says, "Hey, I want to talk to you about school." I said, "Okay." He said, "Let's go on a walk together before you leave." And so he comes over. He was at BYU at the time. And we go on a walk, and he tells me that he's gay. Up until this point, I knew nothing about homosexuality. I had a gay cousin, but he was very kind of flaunted it. I felt like it was an attention-seeking thing. I felt like it was a choice. But I didn't know gay people. I didn't know that it was as common as it is. I had no idea that, I thought maybe a handful of people in the church struggled with same-sex attraction. I had no idea that it was so common. So this rocked my world because my brother, he was a returned missionary. He really struggled with the scrupulosity all through high school too, reading his scriptures, never dated girls, never kissed girls. And me having been someone that struggled with immorality, he was my hero. He did it all right. He didn't struggle with the things I struggled with. He was righteous. He served a mission.
And you internalized that as him being faithful, but really he was gay.
Yes, exactly. And so this rocked my world. And again, I was still in this mindset of no empty chairs, that you don't follow the path, you're not going to be in the celestial kingdom. And so I just was heartbroken that my brother and I had some other kind of rebellious siblings. And so he was one of the safe ones. He was one of the ones that I knew was going to make it because, he's so righteous and he's so good. And so I never had to worry about him. And now all of a sudden, this hero of mine is telling me that I'm gay. And it's funny because his best friend at the time, Sterling, would always come to family gatherings. And I had the biggest crush on Sterling. I thought he was so attractive. And I would, ask my brother, has Sterling ever said anything about me? Has he ever, mentioned if I'm cute or whatever? Anyway, so I ask him when he tells me he's gay, I'm like, does Sterling know that you're gay? And he's like, Sterling's my boyfriend. So, so I was shocked. And I was like, well, you're not keeping, you're not keeping your covenants. You're not being, it's one thing to be gay. You can be gay, but you can't be gay and act on it. And so again, that was heartbreaking to me. And I remember him telling me, Kalin, I grew up hearing all these love songs and they never really resonated with me. They never made sense. He said, until I kissed a boy for the first time And it was like fireworks. And all of a sudden, that moment, all the love songs made sense for me. And, you know, I knew my brother. I knew who he was. And I knew this was not a choice that he would make. And we had many conversations after that where he helped me to understand that even more, about, you know, he begged and pleaded for God to take this away from him. He wanted so badly to marry a girl. He wanted so badly he just thought if he'd go on a mission, if he'd be righteous enough, that God would take this from him. And so this really, really screwed up the way I viewed gay people. You know, now all of a sudden I've got this huge gaping hole in the plan of salvation. Like, how does this fit? How does this make sense? How is God okay with this? And so I go to BYU, Idaho, and I'm grappling with that, and I'm really struggling with that. But again, I'm faithful. I'm being, you know, true. I'm praying for him. I'm praying he'll see the light and, you know, come back to the fold.
Did you see it like as he told you, we're like, oh yeah, I would have guessed that. Did you have any clue?
Not in a
Were
moment.
there mannerisms, like stereotypical things where you're looking back, it's like, oh, that was obvious, or?
Now, yes,
Okay.
my gaydar is much more attuned now. But at the time, I had no idea. And he wasn't very feminine at all, like not very typical in that sense. But I mean, looking back, I mean, he was choir, drama, did all the, you know, had all girlfriends, didn't have many very close guy friends. So I see it now. But at the time, I didn't recognize what those stereotypes were. I didn't even know many gay people again. Like, I just had no idea. And so... that was hard, but I was going to figure out why it was the way it was. And I was going to stay true because obviously the prophet is right. And I remember him telling me, you know, I think the church is going to change its stance one day. And I was like, I thought he was crazy. I was like, are you kidding me? Like, no way. Like, that would completely destroy the plan of salvation. Like, they're not going to change their mind on this. So I go to BYU, Idaho. I'm in my first science class and I learn about evolution for the first time. And that was another thing that was so hard for me. And I remember my BYU Idaho professor proposing some possible explanations that just seemed absolutely absurd to me. He was passing around these fake skeleton skulls of Neanderthals or some, you know, ancient human, Homo sapien, whatever. And I'm learning about evolution. He says, you know, maybe God put these skeletons here for us just to challenge our faith and just to, you know, make us, you know, have to exercise more faith. And I just remember thinking, like, really? Like, did God really bring, you know, and
it's the trickster God.
Yeah. And I remember reading, like, we were assigned to read different conference talks in addition to that. And like President Nelson saying, you know, evolution is not true. Another prophet saying, if evolution is true, the church is false. Bruce R. McConkie, his 7 deadly heresies, like talking about evolution being one of them, you know, that like absolutely not, like this cannot be. And I remember learning about the age of the earth. That was another thing I had never known. I don't know why at 18 years old, I'm just finding out these things. But again, it just starts to cause a little bit of cognitive dissonance for me. How do I reconcile these things? Do I have to just completely deny scientific evidence in order to keep my faith? And again, I'm operating this very, very black and white Mormon world. You know, it's all true. Everything any prophet or apostle has ever said in any general conference is the word of God to us. Like, they are the mouthpiece for the Lord. And so it had never occurred to me that they might say things in error or that something that they said might not actually be true. So I'm grappling with this, and then I don't remember how I came across it, but I'm on YouTube one day and I see a documentary about the Book of Mormon or the Book of Abraham translation. And I watch it, and it's 2 hours long. And that was very problematic for me because here we have this book that's supposedly a translation written by the hand of Abraham, and we have the papyri, and it doesn't match. It's not true. It's not a true translation. It's false. It's absolutely made up in the sense that the translation does not match what the papyri actually says, or the facsimiles. Every single thing on there is wrong. And
the word Abraham doesn't even appear anywhere in the papyrus.
And the timeline of, when Abraham lived, it just didn't match up. And I remember reading kind of some like apologist stuff on Fair Mormon that my dad had directed me to. And they're saying, maybe it wasn't a direct translation, maybe it was like a revelation. But in the documentary, they talk about Joseph Smith having made an alphabet of the characters, and he translated, in English, the alphabet. So he didn't believe it was a revelation. He really thought that he was translating, and so I'm thinking if we have the papyri and this doesn't match, we don't have the golden plates. God decided to take those back for some reason. But if we have this example of him making up a translation, what does that say about the Book of Mormon for something that we don't have the evidence to compare? And that was very problematic for me. That shattered that black and white perspective for me, something as simple as that. Then I remember I also did a quick Google search of, problems in Mormonism or something, or why the church might not be true. And I found it was like this 50 reasons why the church isn't true, or 50 things you didn't hear at church. And it was like stuff like Joseph Smith had 30-something wives. Joseph Smith married other men's wives. Joseph Smith drank alcohol. Joseph Smith had a gun at Carthage jail. Stuff that, like, again, I never heard any of these things. I had zero idea. And again, and some of these things aren't even problematic. Like, it's fine that Joseph Smith drank alcohol, but it's a problem because I grew up hearing the story of how he refused to take alcohol as a sedative for his leg surgery. Yeah. And so it's like, I feel like I'm lied to. Like, why did we paint this perfect picture? And again, him having a gun in Carthage, also not a problem.
Self-defense.
Sure, self-defense. Yeah. But why do we leave that out? Why is that not a part of the narrative?
And make him sound like a total martyr. I mean, he was a martyr, but it wasn't like a lamb. He didn't go like a lamb to the slaughter.
He went like a fighting. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so
it's just different than what we were taught.
Yes. So I immediately this is already causing so much cognitive dissonance for me. And
you're 18, 19?
It was 2 months before my 19th birthday.
Okay.
And right as this is all happening.
Too much shy of your 19th birthday.
Yes. I was meeting with, my religion professor, asking questions. I'm talking to my dad about this stuff. And right about that time, General Conference comes around and it's announced that females can serve missions at 19. And at this point, I really wanted to serve a mission. I had been, planning on it. I was going to wait till I was 21. And for me, a big part of that was I had to somehow make up for the fact that I wasn't a virgin. No worthy Mormon boy was going to want to marry a girl who lost her virginity, who didn't save herself for marriage. So I thought, if I serve a mission and I'm proven worthy enough to go on a mission, maybe that might help a boy to look past my sexual indiscretions from when I was younger. So I put all of this on the back burner. No, I've got to serve a mission. This stuff can't be true. And so I just kind of ignore it. And I just double down on scripture study and prayer and preparing for my mission and trying to be clean and not slip up with masturbation. And I go to my bishop and tell him the very day that the age change happens. I call my bishop and I say, I want to meet with you. And he says, I thought I'd be hearing from you. And I go to him and he says, Kalin, I don't know if you're going to be able to serve a mission. There's some guidelines in the church handbook that you don't meet. And I think it was people who either have more than one sexual partner or more than a few times have participated in the act aren't eligible to serve a mission. And so that just crushed me. I was devastated. And I knew, because I had asked him about it before the age change even happened, if I want to serve a mission one day, will I be able to? And he said, I don't know. So this happens and he says, I don't know. We're going to have to talk to the stake president. We're going to have to figure this out. So I meet with the stake president and I remember just telling him my story, having to describe in detail all the things that I did, how many times, with how many people, every act. And
every act?
Yep, every act. I mean, I'm not saying every position or whatever, but oral sex or intercourse or touching, all that kind of thing. And I remember him having to meet with me again. I don't know if he had to speak to a general authority or get special permission. I don't know what it was, but eventually the decision was made that I was going to be able to serve, that I had shown by this mighty change and having been clean since that time that I was truly repentant and, I was deemed worthy. But I had to go 3 months without slipping up with masturbation. So that was, I was put on a timeline to try to make efforts. So it took me about 9 months to reach the 3-month timeline that I had to. And even then I didn't. And my dad, like I said, went to bat for me and went and spoke with the bishop and said, come on, like, you got to give her a break. She went so long. It was a moment of weakness. She's trying so hard. Please just give her a chance. So I put in my papers. A few weeks later, I get my call to Puebla, Mexico. And a couple months after that, the boy that I dated my senior year of high school dies from a drug overdose. And he was...
Like opiates?
Heroin.
Yeah, opiates.
Yeah. So I should know
no,
that.
it's fine. Yeah.
He had been in a fire. They lived in Mexico when he was about 14, and he had fallen into a fire and burned like half of his body and became addicted to pain medication and struggled with addiction. But he was the best human you'll ever meet, like literally so incredible. And so this was devastating, not only for me, but my whole family. My whole family adored him. My dad said that he mourned his death more than he mourned his own father's death. My dad, helped prepare his body for burial. My dad spoke at his funeral. This was a big deal for me. And it was the first time I'd ever lost somebody close to me. And so all this faith crisis stuff starts coming back. Because even though I'd always been taught about the afterlife, I felt like I was never going to see him again. In my heart, I didn't believe it. I didn't believe that I was ever that there was anything after that. It just felt like he was gone, and he was gone forever. And that was troubling to me. Why am I not feeling like this hope and this joy of, like families can be together forever and we'll be reunited and, whatever. So I'm really, really struggling now. Is God even there? What if God's just in my head? What if there's a scientific explanation for why I feel, quote unquote, the spirit? And I don't research any of this because I'm terrified to, because I know there's probably information out there that's going to make this cognitive dissonance worse. And that's when I find Mormon Stories Podcast, because I have my mission call. I am trying to find ways to make this work with all these doubts I'm having. And somehow I come across Mormon Stories. And I think you had and I don't know if you still do, but on your page somewhere, kind of a list of ways to stay active in the church despite having...
It's called staylds.com.
Yes,
staylds. It's still there. And it's a big essay that I wrote in 2007 after I'd gone inactive for a year and then missed the church so much. I wrote a manual on how to stay in the church after you've lost your faith. And it's like a 60-page manual. You must have stumbled on that.
Yes, I did.
Which we still maintain. It's still there. And I'm still supportive of that. It mileage may vary, but
right.
But if people can make the church work, I'm fully in support of that. So that you found Stay LDS.
Yes, I found Stay LDS. And at this point, I feel so alone. I don't know anybody else that's ever gone through doubts like I was having. And I have a mission call. I'm supposed to go on a mission. And I want to go because, again, I want to find a righteous priesthood holder. And I feel like I can't do that if I don't serve a mission. And I wanted to go. I had this spiritual experience and I wanted to share it with others. And all my friends were going. Of my graduating class, I think 700 of us, over half of the men and women in my graduating class at Lone Peak High School were serving missions. Like everybody was going. It was the cool thing to do. And I remember praying and pleading with God, and I felt nothing. I remember going to the temple. I got my endowments, and my stake president challenged me to go 30 times before entering the MTC. And so I was doing it. I was going 3 times a week to the temple to do an endowment session. And I remember one day I'm like, I'm not leaving the temple till I get an answer. Like, I need something to help me. Like, I have the most pure intentions. I want to serve a mission. Like, if anyone has a sincere heart and good intent, it's me. Like, I want to go serve the Lord for a year and a half, but I feel like I can't do that if I don't get something to help me. And so I go and I'm there for 4+ hours in the celestial room. Like, I am not leaving until I have a spiritual experience. Nothing ever happens. And I just remember leaving that day feeling so deflated, so disappointed, so hurt that God was ignoring my prayers and wouldn't help me. But I decide to go, and I decide, you know what, God, if you want me to, I don't want to give up yet. So my mission is my offering to you. Please, like, by the end of my mission, I just want to know if it's true. I just want to have a testimony. And so I went into the MTC not even knowing if there was a God, but saying, this is my offering. And I feel like if I give a 1.5 years to you, like, you've got to give me something in return. I've got to have some sort of experience that is going to help me know that everything I read is false and not true, and that the church really is true and God is there, and I'm going to see this friend again. And so, yeah, I go into the MTC with that.
And I really relate to that in my own story. Just 16 years old, totally living all the commandments, praying, reading the Book of Mormon cover to cover, praying and not getting the answer, kneeling down a second time, praying, not getting an answer. And you struggle between, is it real or am I broken? And I'm sure you probably wondered, was it your unworthiness, quote, unworthiness, that was keeping you from getting the witness that you wanted?
Absolutely. Up until, years later when I went through my second faith crisis, it was always, it's me. It's got to be some defect in me. And even after being married 3 years, is it because I had sex as a teenager? Is it because I struggled with masturbation? Is it because I was, immoral? Am I still suffering the consequences of those actions? Yeah,
that's super hard.
Yeah.
And did you ever try and talk to your dad or anyone, Bishop, just maybe you've already talked about this a bit, but just like, why am I not getting an answer? And did they give you reasons? Did they try and like, there's always this sort of like, well, maybe I'm getting the feeling, but I'm just not recognizing it. Or maybe I'm looking past the signs, or maybe it's wrong to seek a sign.
Yeah.
And then ultimately you just end up, I did this too. It's like, well, I'll just say I believe it. They tell you to do this. Say you bear your testimony to get a testimony.
Testimony is made in the bearing of it.
Yeah. And technically that's not being honest. If you're saying, I know it's true, but you don't know it's true, I mean, by any technical definition, that's dishonesty. But in a religious framing, it's like, no, it's not dishonesty. You're it's
hoping
faith. It's faith, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of what you did.
Yeah. And I think I downplayed it a lot because, like I said, I had a mission call. I didn't want anyone telling me, hey, like, if you're struggling this much, you probably shouldn't go, because I still wanted to go. And so I downplayed it a lot, but I was honest with my parents. I remember my dad talking to me and using the analogy of like a tree that, in Alma 32, we talk about planting seeds, but a tree doesn't grow overnight. Some people struggle for years. And I don't know if you ever read the Terrell Givens Letter to a Doubter. There's a lot of, in his book, Crucible of Doubt, he uses a lot of the same things in that book. But this letter came out way before that book that he wrote to someone that was struggling.
I remember that letter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my sister sends this to me, and my sister at that time, I don't know how much for her, but my sister had gone through a faith crisis, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But so she sends me this letter, and it's all about this idea of, like, there has to be ambiguity, there has to be uncertainty, and it's only in that place that we can really figure out who we are and what we truly want, that God sets it up this way so that we can truly find what's in our heart and what we ultimately want out of this life and out of mortality. So I'm clinging to that kind of idea. I'm clinging to some of the apologetics that I read. And in the MTC, I'm really struggling. Like, you have the mock investigators, and I just felt like a fraud. And they tell you what kind of things to say. You say, hey, I know this is true, and you're testifying. I'm like, I don't know. How can I tell someone they're going to get an answer to a prayer that I haven't gotten and I've been trying to get for months? Like, it felt very disingenuous to me to be promising these kinds of things to our fake investigators that I clearly was not receiving for myself. And I remember my dad sending me an email. I had left like one of my journals on my bed after I left to the MTC, and I guess my dad read it. And he emailed me and he's like, I had no idea how much you were struggling. I'm so sorry. Like, I didn't know like the depth of your feelings and how much you were questioning. But towards the end of the NPC, I have this experience where I'm reading DNC, I think it's 9, about Oliver Cowdery. He's saying like,
study it out in your mind.
Starting out in your mind, and if it be true, you'll have a burning in the bosom, and if it not be true, you'll have a stupor of thought, and you'll forget the thing which was wrong. And I couldn't remember the things I'd read. I couldn't remember. The only thing I could remember was the Book of Abraham translation. I couldn't remember about the,
polygamy,
all the other things, that list. And so I was like, I read this and it was like this spiritual, like, God is answering my prayers. It's not true. Everything I read is not true. Like, I'm having this stupor of thought and I can't remember those things. So I also was able to get by on that. That kind of got me through the MTC and propelled me into the mission field. But again, I still struggled with doubts. Probably the first 6 months of my mission were filled with, I remember just looking up at the stars at night and just feeling empty, like feeling like I want so badly to believe that there's something out there. But I don't know if there is. But I'm still every day testifying, I know the church is true. I know God loves you. I know if you pray that you'll get answers. And, I'm doing exactly what you described, that bearing my testimony, just hoping that in time, I'll get my answers.
I remember that moment in Guatemala where it's like the first time I'm actually teaching a real discussion. And because I took honesty so seriously, my dad would tell me, I'd rather you spit on me than be dishonest to me, than lie to me. Wow. So I just like, I can't ever lie. You know what I mean? I'm one of those weird guys. I didn't even masturbate before my mission, or before my marriage. Like, I was just so I don't know how I was able to do that, but so honesty was just really important to me. And so when I'm going into that first interview, that first charla, that first practica, whatever it is, the missionary discussion, lesson, I'm thinking to myself, I'm going to have to, it's one thing to be able to say that in the MTC. It's one thing to say that in a church setting, but now I'm teaching a real human and I'm going to be testifying about something that I'm supposed to say I know, and I don't know. I still don't know. And I just remember having to make that decision. I'm just going to say I know and I don't really know, and just trust Heavenly Father that it'll all be okay. And that just started a couple of years of just saying I knew and I didn't. Was it that conscious for you as well? Or?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah.
I knew that I guess I didn't see it as being dishonest. I saw it as putting forward all my hopes and focusing on what I did believe or want to believe rather than focusing on my doubts.
It could be framed as an act of faith.
Yes, it was an act of faith.
Not of dishonesty.
Yeah. And so I did that, and the mission field really was a perfect place for my personality. I loved the numbers game. I loved getting the, recognition. I loved feeling, and at that time they're now having these leadership positions for girls. And I'm like, I want that. I want to be a trainer. I want to be a sister training leader. I want to be seen as a really good missionary. I want my district leaders to be proud of me when I turn in my numbers each Sunday. I want my zone leaders to be proud. And my whole mission, I kind of feel like I was straddling the lines of having good intentions and having wanting to be seen as good and wanting to receive praise for my numbers and for how I was seen as a missionary. And I remember my first few weeks, we were contacting 100, 200 people a week, and that was the highest in the mission. And we were having all these lessons. One week we had 40 lessons, and my mission president even brought us up as an example in one of the zone conferences. And I just remember feeling so much pride. And after 3 months, I get called as a sister training leader, and I'm learning the language.
What is that?
Or sorry, not as a sister training, as a trainer. So I become a trainer, and okay. I train a new missionary.
A junior companion, a greenie.
Yeah, I trained, new. And I'm I'm only 3 months into the mission, just learning Spanish. So then after 3 months after that, I get called as a sister training leader. Again, all of this, really fuels my drive and my motivation. And I don't even know if I realized what was happening until I remember distinctly one week. We had 11 investigators at church that week, which was like unheard of. And, everyone's like praising us. And, I just feel so happy, and I'm attributing, miracles to God. And then the next week we have these same 11 people committed to come, and only one shows up. And I'm angry, like visibly pissed off that they didn't come. And I'm like, this is not good. This is not Christ-like that I'm feeling this way as a missionary. Like, this is not about their salvation. This is about me being disappointed that my district leaders are going to be like, hey, what happened? Last week you had 11 people at church and now you only have one. And I was embarrassed. I was humiliated that, that we were supposed to have all these people come. And so again, I don't want it to make it sound like I was only that kind of missionary. I feel like I had good intentions and a good heart, but I get so caught up in that. And I would repent and really try to like focus on just loving the people and being a good person. And, I was constantly battling this in the mission while also battling doubts. And so, it was interesting listening to your first Mormon Stories episode, and seeing myself in some of those missionaries and feeling ashamed of, that's sad that it's easy to get caught up in numbers and feeling like attributing that to God when really, a lot of the times we weren't really helping these people. We were trying to booster our numbers and our, make ourselves look really good. And that's sad. I'm really regretful of that.
Because the idea is to bring souls to Christ,
Yep.
But in Latin America and other countries, you can get baptisms because these people could be so poor, and you're this tall, white, affluent American, and you can get them in the water, and you can sometimes baptize 5 or 10 or even 50 a month. And in your mind, you're bringing souls to Christ, but in reality, you're just getting it can be just getting a bunch of Latinos wet, but then they fall away immediately. But then your numbers are big, and then you're successful and you're faithful and the Lord's blessing you. And it becomes this weird ego kind of head trip of feeling like you're being righteous and being like this soul saving missionary, when it's really just kind of it can be a bit empty and shallow. And then you see in Chile or Mexico or Brazil, like 10% activity rates, in some of these countries, and thousands of stakes being opened and closed because in some ways it's what they call a Potemkin town. It's a bit of a shell of reality.
Yeah. And by the time I served, quite a few things had changed. I mean, we had to have five weeks of attendance before that they could be baptized. So we didn't have those kind of numbers at all.
That's great.
Yeah. So now they require 5 Sundays of attendance, at least sacrament. That's good. They can't just come to the second hour.
Yeah, but they'd baptize without even taking them to church.
Right. Yeah. So that was really, really hard because you have 6 weeks in a transfer. So you've got to meet your investigators in the first week to ever
it's like a pipeline.
People.
You got to get them in the pipeline early.
Exactly.
Or you don't get your own baptism. Somebody else gets your baptisms.
And it's interesting because I had been so excited to serve a mission, and you learn in the MTC that like the Spirit is going to tell you what to say. The Spirit is going to like direct every word that comes out of your mouth, and is going to help you find people, and people are going to like be so moved hearing the story of the first vision, and this Spirit is just going to like envelop the room. And I just didn't have that experience. I rarely, if ever, felt like God was telling me what to say in those moments. And again, I attributed that to my own unworthiness. I didn't feel like I was being guided all the time. I felt very uncomfortable inviting people to be baptized in the first lesson. I felt very uncomfortable manipulating people into trying to have spiritual experiences that they just weren't having. And, people would say like, I haven't had the experience you're telling me. And we're like, well, tell me about what you're feeling. Like, do you feel like a better person when you read the Book of Mormon? Do you feel like there's things that inspire you? Oh, that's the Spirit. Like, you are getting your answer. You did receive an answer. Like, it's true.
Yeah.
And, I felt very uncomfortable with that. So I feel like kind of as a coping mechanism, well, and then the other part of it is that you wonder, are we really helping these people? Because we're holding them accountable. If they reject us, then it's like they're rejecting the gospel. If we had never come to them in the first place, they probably would have been, right, innocent, better off, and not held accountable. And so I struggled with that. I struggled with, some of kind of the manipulation used in missionary work. And I think I just kind of numbed myself by not caring. Like I didn't feel like I was actually helping them sometimes. So it was easier to focus on some of these more external things like numbers and
praise.
Yes. Because I
and leadership positions.
Exactly.
Right.
Because I really questioned
ego stuff.
Yes. And I struggled with that because I questioned how helpful we were really being. But I think all in all, I was a good missionary. I think I tried my best. I don't know if Tad Callister, I think the consecrated missionary, he has a talk that he gave at the MTC that was like my gold standard of missionary work. And it's very, very, very intense, that talk, and very specific about exactly what the best consecrated missionaries are. And I had it all marked up, and I tried to emulate that. We did not come home before 9 a.m. We never slept past 6:30 like that. Even like doing exercise to me was about obedience. You do your 30 minutes of exercise because that's what the White Handbook says. And I was obedient. I was hardworking. From the outside, I looked like a phenomenal missionary, and I was praised as being such. But I had an internal struggle that, I didn't ever talk about with anyone because, my letters home, I tell my parents, I really cringe reading my journals and my letters because I wasn't completely honest with myself about what was going on internally. And, I don't want to I feel like sometimes we look back and jade our experiences, and I don't want to do that because I did have positive experiences, and my mission was wonderful in a lot of ways. But I did constantly struggle with feeling like I was doing things more out of ego than out of truly wanting to help.
Really quickly, 3 things. Number one, a lot of the men that we've interviewed on Mormon Stories who struggled with masturbation prior to their mission, it was an issue about whether they did that on their mission. Is there anything you want to say about that?
So I went the first 9 months, didn't slip up at all, which was the longest I'd ever gone my whole life.
Yeah.
Since I was 7, since I started. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I'm cured. About 9 months in, I think I had my first slip up. And I told myself, if I slip up one more time, I'll tell my mission president. Because again, like I had to confess or else, I wasn't worthy. And I don't even remember if I waited till the second slip up. I think the guilt got at me, and I felt, because I had to wait 3 months to go on my mission, I thought I might get sent home.
Yeah.
Like I didn't realize that there are people that struggle with that on a mission and are fine staying out. So I told my mission president, and he was phenomenal about it. He gave me the book by Brad Wilcox, The Continuous Atonement, which is a phenomenal book and really helped heal me in a lot of ways with regards to, feeling like God loved me through it, and that it was okay that I was still struggling a little bit. But I think I maybe masturbated 4 times my whole mission. Mm-hmm. It was very, very infrequent and very much not a problem.
Yeah. Sounds like you had great parents and you had great leaders overall.
I did.
And I'm happy for you.
Me too. I was blessed in that way. But yeah, my mission president definitely was very kind. He actually had me meet with a therapist though on my mission, which was kind of embarrassing because my companion's like, why are you having to take time out of our day to like have this call with a therapist? Because I think he saw that this was something, I'd struggled with since the time I was 7, and he thought, maybe I needed a little bit. It was deeper than just, I don't know, but I met with a therapist like once a week for about a few months, mm-hmm. Just over the phone, which was kind of interesting in Mexico. So 2 other quick themes I just have to reiterate, and we've talked about this before on Mormon Stories. One is how beautiful the mission is. Like, just like we were talking about, your conversion at 16 and how you were studying the scriptures in seminary and like really in it to win it as a righteous Mormon youth. My heart still feels like that's so beautiful. And same with missions. Like, you learn a language, you're serving a culture, you're taking 2 years out of your life when you're supposed to be most selfish, and you're like serving truth and love and kindness and bringing people to Christ. Like, and gaining all these skills of assertiveness and communications and leadership, and what a phenomenal experience. Like, I want everyone to have that experience. That's part of how I feel. And I still feel that way.
I still love my mission. I'm so grateful for it. And that there's no counter to that. The only other thing I was going to say is that one of the hard things about the Mormon upbringing is that in some ways you're taught to lie. And I don't mean that in a mean way, but whether it's hiding, you were scrupulous, so you couldn't lie to your bishop. And maybe you weren't honest with your parents for a while, but so many youth masturbate and just don't tell anyone. And so many youth mess around, but they just don't tell anyone. And so they learn, the system sets them up to just lie. And then they don't ever have the struggles you did going on a mission because they just never told anyone. And so they just get to go. There's no spirit of discernment that keeps them. They just get to go. And there's that pressure clamp at the MTC where they try and guilt them into confessing. And if they confess, they go home and sometimes don't come back, but sometimes they go home and then come back. But anyway, whether it's sort of hiding normal behavior, which is interpreted as sin, or this issue of saying that you believe when you really don't, or saying that you know things when you really don't. There's part of that that's learning to not always be honest and a system reinforcing that. And then there's part of that which is, and this is so hard, it's systematically disconnecting you from yourself. And so instead of just, no, I don't know the church is true, so I can't go on a mission. The social pressures are so intense, and you want to please your parents, and you want to be that good kid, and you see all your Lone Peak friends going on missions, and there's all that frenzy. Instead of like doing what feels really right and intrinsic to you, you kind of override that, push it down. I'm going to be righteous. I'm going to be faithful. And you kind of disconnect from yourself. And I think that's, you picked the title of today's episode, and I think that's a core theme. So on the one hand, you're having this great mission experience, you're learning a lot, you're feeling inspired. I guess the other half of that question is, are you kind of disconnecting from your core self in that process? Is there a duality of beauty, but also a little bit of tragedy for you as you think about that, or not? Is it just all good?
It didn't feel like it at the time. At the time, I felt like I was finding my true self. Like I felt like for the first time I have journal entries where I'm like, I'm finally the person I've always wanted to be. And like, I remember being terrified of coming home from my mission, of like revolt, or like going back to having doubts, or back to, and I don't know at what point in my mission, I can't pinpoint a day or a time, because I never had a super powerful, overwhelming experience that changed things for me. It was just little by little, I just stopped doubting and I started believing. And by the end, I felt like I knew. I felt like I knew it was true. But I was terrified of losing that. I was terrified of, because at the time it felt like I'd finally found who the real Kalin is. And she's this, wonderful missionary, for the gospel of Christ. And I didn't want to lose that. But I definitely, looking back, realized how disconnected I was with some of the things I was feeling at the time that I would suppress. I wasn't honest about in my letters home. I wasn't even honest about in my journals. But I know what those feelings were looking back, and I have been honest with myself since then that, there was a lot of wanting to do things for praise, and not feeling like some of the things we were doing was actually helpful or was actually going to be beneficial for the people. In a lot of ways, it felt like we were tearing them from their belief system, their home, their families. That, felt wrong. And later we, when we talk about more about how feminism plays into my journey, I really regret how I talked about like Maria and how I took away that feminine divine from people and labeled that as, this is like a gold cow and, worshiping a different God.
So when missionaries, when Catholics or former Catholics in Mexico would talk to you about their Catholic beliefs, talk about what that was like when how you would respond to that as a missionary.
Yeah, for me, it was all intellectual. I was very, I had a scripture for every question. I had a Bible scripture. I wouldn't use Book of Mormon scriptures because I felt like that was kind of paradoxical to be like, oh, no, don't do that. The Book of Mormon says this. Like, so I would have something from their scripture, which is the Bible, to support our theology. And so I was obsessed with that. I loved my personal scripture study because it was really, really fun for me to see a pattern of the common questions that Catholics would have and then have a rebuttal to every single thing. Same with Jehovah's Witnesses. I loved when we'd run into Jehovah's Witnesses because I really, really studied some of their core beliefs and had a lot of different scriptures to throw at them if I could have the chance. But with Maria, Mary, I guess. Sorry, it's not Maria.
Yeah. No, it's
Mother
both.
Mary. I guess, yeah, for me, it's Maria. But, they would pray to her. And that was, for a lot of Catholics, that's, their main form of worship is directed towards her. And, I would always go to the 10 Commandments and be like, this is not what God wants. This is idolatry. And the only person we should pray to is God. And so it was interesting kind of going through my feminist awakening and really, really mourning not having a feminine divine and how jealous I am of the fact that they have a motherly influence to pray to. So, I have some regrets about taking that from people too.
And there's something, again, it's so bittersweet looking back because knowing the truth and sharing the truth and giving these natives or, these are really colonialistic, insulting terms, but like giving these poor, dark, third world, and again, I don't mean any of that, but like in your mind, it's like you're blessing the Lamanites, you're helping these poor people get the true gospel of Christ and to save them. And sometimes that even works out where the LDS church really blesses their lives. There's another angle to that. Everything's complex in a spectral world where it's very much cultural colonialism. It's like, yeah, we know how to read the Bible. You don't. We've got the truth. You don't. Our ordinances count. Yours didn't count. And our God's the good one, and your God's like idol, right? And there's something so insulting about that now, thinking back, when at the time it's so sweet and pure and naive. Like a Mormon missionary, unlike most people in the world, knows everything.
Yeah, well, and for me too, like the Catholic Church was the great and abominable church.
Yeah.
I knew technically it wasn't, but
It kind of was.
We would kind of have a running joke with the missionaries of like, Book of Mormon says it, not us. But like we saw a lot of similarities to how the Book of Mormon. But again, I had a very tainted view of Catholicism. I see it very differently now than I did at that time. Just like you described, it was very, so sad that they don't have the truth and, they have all these false doctrines and the Bible's been changed and corrupted over time or whatever. So, that was, it is what it is. And I don't think I really had that much success on my mission, so maybe my regrets are less than someone else. But
not a lot of baptisms. Is that what you mean?
No, my mission in general didn't have a lot of baptisms for being a Mexico mission. But I had a few, none in my first 6 months, and then I think 2 or 3 in the second 6 months, and then my last month or 2 in the mission, we had like 6. So really, maybe less than 10 my whole mission.
I had 10 a month.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I expected.
Or more.
That's what I expected.
Like we had missionaries with 40 baptisms in a month.
And that was what was expected of us. We were expected to have 1 baptism a month. And we even had a general authority come and speak to the mission and basically tell us like, "O ye of little faith," for not having at least a baptism a month. And there was a lot of pressure there from district leaders. You'd call and you'd give your numbers. And, well, sister, why don't you have anyone committed for baptism? Do you have the faith to... And my best friend, so that friend I was talking about, that we were roommates at BYU, Idaho, she ended up serving a mission same time as me. And that almost destroyed her faith. She's now left the church, but her mission really, really destroyed her... The same things, struggling with the same things, the pressure on missionaries and the focus on numbers and blaming missionaries for not having enough faith, the patriarchy. She had issues with feminism long before I did, but, that's just, sadly, that ruined the gospel experience for her mission. And she was one of, the really devout good ones.
And we've done some episodes on this. There's a super long history in the church of especially in developing countries like Latin America and the Philippines, Mormon missionaries going bananas and baptizing 10, 20, 30, 40 a month, and missions that baptize 700, 800, 1,000 a month. And it's all fake because all these people never had testimonies and they all fall away. But then those mission presidents become general authorities and everyone feels good about themselves, but they've really done nothing of consequence. And then the church starts to implode because you've got all these wards and stakes where there's like 10 people attending your ward, no priesthood leadership, and the stakes have to be collapsed and nobody can home teach. That's one of the reasons they got rid of the home teaching program. It was taking too much time for all the members to visit all the inactive members every month. It's just impossible. Once the church is at a 10% activity rate, 90% of the people on your ward rolls are not coming, but the 10% have to visit the 90%, and everything buckles. So the way that they solve that is by getting rid of the home teaching program, because at some point the numbers don't work anymore. But it's such a tough thing because these missions can get wrapped around in ego and numbers and stats. And I just want to say that the church knows this is a problem. There were the baseball baptisms in Great Britain in the 60s, early 60s. Elder Holland was a part of that mission. There have been baseball baptisms in Japan. And then I wrote Elder Oaks about my mission, and he wrote me back and said, I'll make things better. The church has known this has been a problem for a long time, but they don't fix it. They try, but it's just every single generation missionaries have the same sort of, same sort of situations where the numbers are emphasized and it's just so problematic. So anyway.
Yeah, I think things are evolving. Like just since I've been home from my mission, we had like 13, 14 key indicators that we reported on each week. And I think they're down to 3 now. I mean, they've completely redone how they do reporting numbers, which was like, when we moved back east and I started going out with the sisters, that was really shocking that change. But I thought it was phenomenal that they did change that, because there was a lot of pressure, lots of different areas to evaluate your faithfulness in, is how it felt.
And so any other stories from your mission you want to cover?
Just that, so my first phone call home about 7 months after I was out for Mother's Day, my little sister was in an eating disorder recovery center. And so my dad drove over there so that she could say hi to me real quick. And she told me that she was dating a girl. So my little sister comes out to me. So now I have 2 gay siblings that I'm grappling with that as well. I talked to my mission president about it, and his advice to me, as he, knowing now, I've talked to him more about it since my mission, but he doesn't know very many gay people and doesn't have a lot of experience in that area. But his advice was, just make sure your siblings know where you stand. Make sure you're not condoning the behavior. So I was still grappling with that.
So did you send her a preachy email, or what'd you do?
Not to her, but shortly. So it was actually funny. So you and Kelly get excommunicated while I'm serving my mission.
Kate Kelly?
Yes, Kate Kelly. And I hear about
2014, 2015.
Yes.
Yeah.
I hear about this, and this is really, really sad to me and really, really hard for me, because I resonated a lot with your story and Mormon Stories and Kate Kelly. I empathize a lot with her feminism and movement. And although I didn't completely and ironically, agree with everything.
You were in a leadership position partly because Kate Kelly and ordained women made such a big stink that the church had to start giving women missionaries more responsibility.
Right. And so, I had, before my mission,
so you benefited from Kate's work, basically.
Exactly. Yeah. And before my mission, I had gone on to ordainedwomen.org and read kind of their reasons why they were doing what they were doing, and how women, at one point in church history did participate in blessings. And then there's Gordon B. Hinckley saying that, women aren't pushing for the priesthood and women don't want this. They're fine. And so I empathized with her reasoning and why she did what she did. And so I was really sad that happened. But what it made me do is buckle down. And that week that I found out you guys were excommunicated is when I sent an email to my family of saying, this is really sad that this happened, but it just makes me think, like, where am I going to stand towards these latter days when all these people are falling away? And I just, I believe that, marriage is between a man and a woman. I will stand by the church and the prophets. And so I didn't send an email directly, but
because Mormons were passive aggressive.
Yes, that was my way of trying to make clear what I believed. But my older sister really helped me with this. And I don't know if it was emails or conversations before my mission, but she said to me, our gay siblings, they don't need to be reminded of what we believe. I mean, they grew up in the church. Yeah, they know what Mormons believe about homosexuality.
Painfully so, yeah.
We don't need to be worried about coming across, like, for heaven's sakes, you're a missionary. Like, they know what you believe. What they don't know is whether you're going to love them despite your beliefs.
This is your sister?
Yeah.
Older sister?
Mm-hmm. And
she's cool.
She's amazing.
I like her.
She's amazing.
Can I meet her someday?
Yes. She's incredible. But what they need to be reminded of is that you love them, and they need to be shown that. Because I was struggling with, like, well, what if they get married? Am I going to go to their wedding one day? What if they have kids? Am I going to be able to support that? All these different specifics of how to. And my sister's emailing me about her new girlfriend, and it felt like even just listening to the emails felt like somehow I was condoning. And so having her tell me that really helped me to handle that better and to just lead with love and remember that, they know what we believe. They know what Mormons believe. They need to know that I love them despite what I believe. So luckily I think I didn't handle it as poorly as I probably would have if I didn't have that.
And was that a believing active sister who was telling you that?
Yeah, she's very nuanced, but she's gone through faith crisis herself.
Okay.
But she's still active. But she's played a huge, huge role in my experiences, and I'll talk a little bit more about her as we go along. But yeah, that was something I grappled with as a missionary too. But again, in Mexico, it just, number one, LGBT issues is not really at the forefront of Mexican politics.
Pueblo life.
Yeah, and same thing with like Mormon criticisms. I never met a single person on my mission that knew enough to be able to challenge our beliefs. I know missionaries go out into some of, the missions here in the U.S. or in Europe, and they get met with all these attacks of Joseph Smith this, Joseph Smith that. I never had to deal with that. I was dealing with people who didn't even know how to read, let alone had any idea what kind of Mormon criticism there was. So I was in a very safe place to nurture my testimony, to not have it challenged, to not have it cause me any problems. So by the end of my mission, I felt like, I know this is true. And yeah,